Okay, thank you. Today is April 15, 2014, and we're going to get started with our webinar, Automating Business Processes for Retail. So what we're going to jump right into today is what we call the business challenges of retail. One of the aspects that we're talking about when we talk about retail is really the definition of multiple locations with multiple or vast numbers of employees, where you have to worry about how do you interact and manage all of those, normally with a corporate financial department, a corporate HR department. We're particularly focused around rapidly growing retailers because those are the ones who we think really can take the best advantage of business process automation. Namely, when you're dealing with accounts payable, finance, or human resource data and documents that come into you in a variety of formats from a variety of different sources. And really the name of the game for us is how do we remove paper from the process and how do we remove the manual interaction from the process. Some of the challenges that a lot of these customers who fit this profile have is they have to deal with vendor invoices in multiple formats. You may be receiving accounts payable invoices from email, from the traditional mail that comes into a mailroom and hopefully somebody scans it. You may receive them across the fax machine. You may get a portion from an EDI transfer, and you may get a portion from another source, such as a web form input. You need to be able to manage those multiple formats. You need to be able to prioritize and schedule payments, of course. You need to be able to manage and approve contracts that may be involved between local vendors and the retail locations. You need to be able to process payroll and human resource documents quickly and rapidly. You need to be able to manage supplier relationships back and forth and hopefully maintain some sort of control over that. And then maybe most importantly, you need to be able to control the cost and the risk of paper handling and storage. And make no mistake, it is a risk when you have contracts or human resource documents or invoices that are managed 1,000 miles away from where they're going to get processed, but they still need approval and they need eyes on in different locations. Being able to streamline and automate that's a very important objective. The realities of retail is that any retailer or restaurant centrally managing multiple locations needs to have a plan to address at least some of those challenges, and some of these that I have listed on this screen here too. You need to be able to process large volumes of information in short intervals of time. Now, I know some of the respondents on the call today only have as little as 40 or 50 locations, but there are a couple on today that may have as many as 2,000 locations. And when you look at the vast number of employees, the vast number of documents, the vast number of locations, being able to manage all of these elements is pretty important. You need to be able to ensure that the local employees don't spend all their time handling and processing paper. After all, a general manager or an assistant manager's primary function is customer service and retail sales. It's not processing paperwork. You may need to be able to maintain regional buying power if you're talking about contracts and invoicing, but still be able to obtain central accountability and visibility back from corporate. You need to be able to keep local managers involved with the supply chain, and you need to be able to ensure compliance and monitoring to what your processes are. For example, if you have a global contract for the purchasing of certain items, such as air conditioning services or liquor if you're a restaurant or a food provider, you may need to be able to monitor whether you're in compliance with that contract to maintain your best pricing from a purchasing standpoint. And when we talked earlier about the rapid growth of many of the people that are on the phone today, you need to, very importantly, control costs as you continue to grow your operation. So consider this example here. We're going to talk about HR documents for a minute. If you're a retailer and you have 5 locations and you're adding 30 locations per year, and you have an average of 30 staff per location, more than likely, due to part-time and seasonal hiring, your turnover may be 48%. And by the way, the Hay Group estimates that the national average for businesses of this type is about 67% turnover, but we're going to look at it at more of a conservative 48%. If you take those same numbers, you can translate that to 7,200 new hires from turnover, plus 900 new hires from expansion and growth. If you take a look at that in terms of 22 pages per employee for processing the job application, the W-2 form or W-4 forms that come in, the payroll, direct deposit forms, any of those pieces of paper, you can quickly and easily add up in just the processing of hires to 178,000 pages per year. And national estimates vary, but depending on the process, you can easily figure out that your cost is anywhere between $1 and $35 a page. And this, I don't have to do the math, here verbally for you to understand the impact of that, but it really comes down to how do you streamline the process. If you look at the manual entry time, for example, of inputting an invoice that comes in, for example, accounts payable at a retail location, and you look at the average here from this source is that 2 minutes per invoice to type that in. Now, obviously, if you're also trying to capture line item detail and that from an invoice, that's much higher than that. But a lot of times your invoices have been matched to a purchase order, but it still takes a couple minutes per invoice. If you're typing in purchase orders manually, it's 1.7 minutes. Inventory receipts, the shipping, the packing slips, another minute and a half. Payroll form may be a little over a minute. In any other typical form, we use an average of 1 minute per form. But you can look at this. This all adds up into time inputting, and more importantly, it adds up into a lot of time and errors and delays in processing as well. So, we're going to jump a little bit back and forth here between accounts payable and HR in a couple of scenarios, but the business problem that we're solving is really the same. Eliminate paper from your process, streamline the input, allow the tools and technology to scan and bring that information in, and your life is going to be much simpler. If you look at the industry averages here from Arden Partners and Aberdeen Group for invoice processing, the average cost by industry to process an invoice is $19 per invoice. Number of invoices an AP processor can process is 1,500. Cycle time 10 days. Percentage of invoices that in this scenario they're receiving on paper is 80%. Then there's the error rate. How many have to be reprocessed because somebody types in something wrong, pays it wrong, or delays the due date for some reason. And then you've got the invoices that are received from errors. Who's checking those against purchase orders to make sure you're getting charged contractually what you're supposed to be charged for it. The best-in-class providers, though, when you look at the numbers, can reduce that invoice processing rate to less than $2, and they can reduce the cycle time to 3 days and reduce the errors from invoices in half. All of this is achieved by automating the business process, and I'm going to walk through some case studies in a few minutes for you. Here, though, is an image to give you a visual of what we're talking about. So this is an invoice on the right. It's actually an invoice from a Coca-Cola distributor to a particular restaurant location. And you'll see in the different boxes on the screen, the technology today has the ability to capture and index, which means pull the data off of the screen. Then we can validate it, and then we can archive this image and do all that paperlessly to avoid this processing. So, for example, in the green block there, you'll see invoice date, invoice number, amount due. We can easily, with the technology, extract that information off so that nobody has to type that in, and so that it gets automatically input back into your accounts payable management system or your ERP accounting system. We can also pull off in the light blue the payment terms down there. We can pull off the remittance in the purple. We can pull off all the line item details, which is outlined in the yellow or orange box there. But more importantly, we don't just pull this data off and then stick it somewhere. We have the ability with the technology today to validate it. For example, this invoice came from Coca-Cola USA, P.O. Box 102499. I can check that against your vendor master to make sure that that's an authorized vendor and do all that with business rules we set up electronically. I can also check the line item pricing for every single item in that orange list below to make sure that you're not being charged 1 penny too much for any item in that list. And when there is an error received, we can send that through a workflow for processing so that you can ensure that what you're paying is what you've contracted to pay for. And the same scenario goes to any different type of form, whether that's a bill of lading, a payroll document, an HR document. We can pull that information directly off of the document through a OCR scanning process and submit it back to the workflow business rules that you want for that particular document to be able to manage the process and automate vast amounts of documents. In fact, when we talk about invoices, our objective is that for 90% of the invoices that come into a business, no person ever has to touch it. We are only focused on handling the exceptions. And when you look at that, and to another visual here is about never having to type the data again. If you get an invoice in from an email, can you drag it over to a box on your desktop that sends it directly into your system without having to open it, and it triggers workflows and it validates the invoice as I just described, and it extracts the data off that invoice and puts it into your accounting system. And by the way, it also stores that image file into a document archiving system so that you can bring it up and view it later. You save time in storing the piece of paper. You save time in finding the information when you need it because it's all searchable. And you certainly save a lot of risk with compliance and cost by making sure that all the information is captured accurately. We also have the ability of, I said earlier with fax and scan, but what about mobile? What about documents that come from Microsoft Office and you can open right in Microsoft Office and save into the same platform to be able to pull this data off? But mobile is a big opportunity for a lot of our customers where you're scanning information. Imagine that the trucker there is delivering goods at your store and they give you a piece of paper for the delivery of produce or goods, and conceivably your manager could put that on the fax machine, or they could also take an image of it with their digital camera and send it off to the system where all that data could be extracted and put into the ERP and checked against the inventory systems in the same 20 minutes. So as I said, it's all about return on investment. When you look at the return on investment from automating these processes, it really gets down into people. How many people are you going to hire in corporate to process accounts payable, inventory, receipts, and other services such as HR every time you add 5 locations or 10 locations or 30 locations? If you are like one of our case studies we're going to get to here in a minute, this is an important question to managing your growth and your costs over the long term. So why automate? Factors, or more importantly, this should be, how do you approach this? Factors to consider when evaluating the technology and automation options out there. What you want to look at is volume counts. You have to look at and make sure that your process makes sense. There are some locations and customers who process 5 invoices a month because everything is centralized and controlled out of distribution centers. So in that case, some of this may not be the right for you. Look for systems with multiple input options. There are systems out there to help you automate processes today, but they may require that all of the information come through their system. That's not the real world. You're not going to get very far if you have to go back out to your vendors and say, hey, we're not going to pay you unless you submit your invoices through my Ariba system. Because a lot of you are dealing with local vendors for produce and services and they're not anywhere close to being able to move to EDI or that type of automation. So you've got to have a system that can manage multiple inputs. You want to make sure you clearly define your requirements. I've talked a lot about our expertise in the retail space, which is very important, because if you've got with the right, if you're looking at the right technology with the right consultants, they're going to help you get to what you really need for your operation. And that comes from the domain expertise and knowing that. Avoid the single point solutions that don't integrate. There are a lot of systems today that are cloud-based for expense report management or bill management or even to some degree, especially around the HR space, there are job application systems and there are different HR systems out there. A lot of them are big websites that have a lot of value, but they don't integrate to your back-end systems. They don't They don't allow you to pull that information up and validate it against your vendor master. They require all of you to manage that offline. Those are not realistic options for the type of clients that are on the phone today. The benefits of process automation, we've talked a lot about here so far, and I won't dive into them again, but there are a couple bullets on here that are unique on this slide that I will get to. The cost of storing paper is very expensive. Many of you may already have systems through Pierce Archives or whatever, somebody who takes the system, the invoices or the HR stuff from terminated employees and comes in and goes into archives, all that off-site. It's very expensive in doing that. It's very expensive in retaining that. It's very expensive when you need to find something. How do you go and find an employee file that hasn't worked with you for 4 years because there's a workman's comp claim that came back around? Or how do you find an accounts payable issue for your auditors when they come in and they want to look at things back 3 years for a particular vendor? Those are all things that you have to consider when you look at this, and everything that we're advocating today is about e-storage, storing the images, the documents, and the data electronically so that you can get paper out of your life. So we're going to talk about a couple case studies that I think are relevant. The first one here is P.F. Chang's restaurant, great Chinese food. They have 2 chains or 2 different brands, the Pei Wei Bistro and the P.F. Chang's high-end restaurants. And, 5 years ago, they had roughly 150 locations. And when they were handling the processing of accounts payable, they really were in a process where they were taking all the invoices that come in on a weekly basis and sending them back to their corporate location for somebody to input back in. And oftentimes there was an error or a mistake, and they had to be sent back and forth, a lot of times by Federal Express 2 and 3 times. In the life of a general manager at P.F. Chang's today, they walk to the fax machine at any time during the day or once a day, whatever they want, stick all of the paperwork that came into the office that day on the fax machine, hit a button, and it goes off into the Moriah technology cloud where we extract each one of those images taken by the fax machine. We save it and archive it for long-term archiving purposes. We extract all the data and tie it into their ERP system. We validate each invoice against the vendor master and each price against contract masters. And we present all that back to the general manager for approval the same day in a web-based interface. So he can just, after he stuck all this fax machine, he can walk over to the web browser and open it up and magically look at all this information and make his approvals without any paper processing. And then likewise, he can route that to higher level managers when approval is needed, and it gives visibility to everyone in the organization to what is going on an ongoing basis. Another case study is Cabelas. Now, Cabelas has a different scenario. They only have 50 locations, but they have hundreds of employees each location. These are very big stores. They're rapidly expanding with 15,000 employees right now, and they're expected to add another 3,000 over the next 12 months. And if you wanted to add turnover on that, which theirs is relatively lower than the normal retail because they're not into a lot of the seasonals, or they're not into a lot of the part-time that other places are at. But still, even in their scenario, they're dealing with 11.2 million annual docket pages that need to be processed. And as we said before, look at the cost of managing all that. In addition, Cabelas is rather unique in the fact that they have, well over almost 100,000 different suppliers involved in the process. Another example is transportation, freight shipments. In this particular case, if you've got forms that are being processed, and you can scan those in, and we can extract that out with the technology for intelligent capture. In this particular case, we're showing that we're storing that in an IBM product called FileNet, which is for enterprise content management. That could go into your local file store or another system. In the next example, we're showing the streamlining of processing around quotations that are given out. And in this particular case, the documents are coming in both via scanning, and they're being managed right out of emails that come in to the system. Those are dropped into the intelligent capture, input into an IBM Maximo system where a work order is generated, and that generates a purchase order back into the providers, whether that's Dell or CDW or whatever else. The important point here is that these processes had to be managed manually or through paper, it would be very arduous and take a lot of people to be able to do it. And the last business case here is around claims processing for insurance claims. This particular one happens to show a couple healthcare forms called the 1500 healthcare form, but this could be any form in your operation. Again, same type of situation. The client's receiving these forms in by a fax machine or being scanned, or they're receiving them in through email. We capture those. We submit the data off of the form into their claims management system, and then we store the image itself off into an IBM FileNet ECM system so that the client can report all this or report on all this information and retain it for compliance. So you may be looking at it and say, well, does that apply to my business? You know, there are people on the phone today from that are retailers for toys. There are retailers here for restaurant industry. There's a couple of retail banks on here. And the answer is yes, this applies, because each and every one of you have multiple sources of paper. You may have different compliance documents that come in. So look at any process that you've got to manage between corporate and your branch or field or your store locations, and think about how you can automate that, how you can utilize technology to avoid stacks of paper on everybody's desk. And that's really where this technology can help you. You know, the last example is a new concept that we're starting to implement more and more with customers. It's called the virtual mailroom. Some of you may call it the digital mailroom or the email room. So this is more about being able to say, even in today's world, a large entity gets a lot of paper in the mail. There's a lot of envelopes to open. And what we're doing with a lot of our customers is we're helping them to automate that process by scanning, so that as emails come in, for example, to resumes at yourstore.com, and invoices come in to accounts payable at yourstore.com, and the job applications for the different locations may get sent to another screening process. We have the ability to take all of these varied sources of scan, fax, email, and run it all into a virtual mailroom where the technology itself can decide, how do we route this, who needs to see this, and how do I make sure that we're acting on every piece of paper effectively and efficiently. And remember that to many companies today, they're digital in the sense that they receive everything via email, but you'd be surprised to see how many companies get a scanned document through email and then will print it out and then process it manually through a printout. And that's really not to anyone's advantage, not only from a green ecology standpoint, but just from a business process standpoint. There are so many ways to automate that today so that you only need to handle these one time. The other aspect that we encourage most of our customers to do is think global. You know, you may have, if you're a retailer and you're focused on North America or maybe the Mid-Atlantic or the Southwest, this may not apply to you, but if you're like a lot of our customers where your vendors are global, they may be in China, they may be in Ukraine, they may be in Russia, or you may have locations all over the world, this technology has no boundaries. We can put a mailroom in one location or in two locations around the world and process everything through a single location in multiple languages. It's very powerful when you look at how that can streamline your process as you look to grow your organization both regionally and globally. So that, as I said at the beginning of this thing, our goal here with today's presentation is to make you think about what's possible. Some of you may already have solutions that are similar to this. Some of you may not know what's really possible at this point. And for that, we're going to encourage you to, come back and follow up with us, and we'll certainly talk more individually about that. Now, at this point, I want to talk a little bit about the Moriah Solutions and what we're doing for other customers. Now, the case studies that I showed you before are somewhat representative of this, but Moriah has actual applications that can be deployed both at your location or in the cloud rather rapidly. On the financial side, for the management and the automation of processing around the financial part of the organization, we have a product called Active Pay, which is accounts payable management, a lot of the invoicing processing I've used, for example. We also have Active Expense, which automates expenses and expense management in the corporation. Active Ledger is not a general ledger. Active Ledger is about allowing your responsibility managers, your store managers, to be able to send approvals for how costs are allocated between your accounting system and your corporate. It's not realistic to give a restaurant general manager access to SAP accounting. So a lot of times those transactions happen via email or Excel back and forth, and we can automate that process so the approval comes up to the general manager and it can be input right through the systems after it goes through approval of accounting. And then Active Energy is about utility cost management, which is you may have corporate metrics for sustainability where this will help apply as well as to streamline the costs. On the human resources side, Active for Personnel is about personnel file management. Imagine signing in to a web browser, being able to see all of the people that report to you's files and being able to see the information you're supposed to see and not one item more. Imagine being able to take a payroll document that may come in for where someone needs to change their withholding and be able to taking a picture of that on your mobile phone, submit it into the system, and payroll manages everything and approves the document and makes sure that that transaction goes through the payroll all through the single process. The training and active onboarding are about workflow management. If you're opening 50 locations and you're hiring 1,000 people a year, what is your process today to make sure they're all trained? Do they all have the proper safety training? Do they all have the proper customer service training? Perhaps you have a package of information that goes out. Perhaps you have standard operating procedures you need to be able to share with them and make sure that they're read. And those are all can be achieved through the same platform using active training and onboarding. These are some of the examples of applications, and many of our customers today start with accounts payable and then bring in one of the other applications later. One of the beauties of this platform is once the platform's in and you go to, for example, Active Pay, you can activate Active Personnel or Active Expense in a matter of hours because the technology exists there once you roll the first application out. So it's a kind of important to understand that the products that I'm describing fit between your corporate financial systems. Look at the image on the right where you'll see you might have Lawson or SAP or Great Plains in the background. We don't replace that. We actually work with that. We extend the functionality of licensing and invoice management out to the real world, those people who actually have to deal with their things every day in a very simple, easy-to-use interface. We do that through our finance applications and our human resource applications that all come under the brand name of ActiveOps. And we do all that in a paperless manner. As a matter of fact, we simultaneously support multiple systems. And we have many times situations where companies have bought other companies and they have 2 and 3 different accounting systems behind the scenes. And by utilizing our system as the single point of interface to those field managers, you can streamline that process and avoid having licensing issues or inefficiencies. Another way to look at this picture, very similar though, is what we're really enabling is a retail collaboration portal between the retail management and the staff in the field on the right and those human resources and accounting departments on the left. Now, many people handle their human resources needs by location by assigning one person to one store, or usually it's one HR person per every 500 or 600 employees, mathematically, however you want to look at that. But the real move here now is to self-enablement or self-service retail, and that's where we're headed with the human resources and the financial management side of things, so that the retail locations can self-manage their needs around financial and HR, but corporate can still maintain visibility to what's going on there. This is more of it's a busy slide, I apologize, but it's a good picture of the complete solution. This is showing how capturing fax, email, and mail on the left goes into image processing and extracting that data, and how we store it into the content management system. And then look at the different systems that you can interact with in this scenario here. We're interacting with the purchasing system, inventory management, accounting system. I have one particular restaurant vendor whose general managers spend 4 hours every week taking receipts of product in, especially around liquor, and inputting that into the point of sale system for inventory relief. And we can automate that process just by sticking that piece of paper on scanning or taking an image of it, extracting the data, and automatically pushing that data right into the point of sale systems. And then there's the interaction around EDI, travel and expenses, purchasing cards. The accounts payable expense management system can manage purchasing cards if you utilize those to enable your end users out in the field or your general managers out in the field. So, I'm going to summarize up a couple things here in a moment, but the basic functions of Active Pay, which is where most of our customers start, are all about capturing and scanning. They're all about having configurable workflow and validations, automation and pre-patch of reviews and approvals of each one of those invoices or the expense reports. There's built-in searchability to everything. There is content storage and archiving. We have the ERP integration or the accounting system integration. There are management reports so that you can review the processing and the analytics. And then, of course, there's an audit trail. If you had to look back later and say, okay, there was an invoice here for the purchase of $30,000 of inventory. Was that approved? And if it was, who approved it? Those all can be seen and reported on through the audit trail. So when you come down to this, what we're really trying to achieve when we're talking about business process automation around retail is corporate collaboration. How do you bring the people in the field, the ones that are customer-facing, in front of the customers every day? How do you bring them in line in collaboration with the rules and governance issues and the compliance and the financial and human resources controls you need to maintain in corporate? So Active Operations, or Active Ops for short, is a cloud-ready software solution that you can deploy both in the cloud or locally on-premise that helps you manage financial and human resource applications. It does not replace your accounting system. It extends that accounting and your HRIS or your human resource system out to a broader number of people that meets their exact business needs. Our vision really is that we can empower collaboration between corporate and those distributed locations. It's going to help you drive customer satisfaction. It's going to help improve profitability, and it's going to help you drive operational excellence. So the conclusion that we come to here today is, and this is based on our interviews with a lot of customers in this space, that retailers need a solution that breaks through the traditional inefficiencies that come out of centrally managing a lot of different locations with a lot of different employees. If you implement a solution for business process automation, you can bring all this together by removing the paper from the process, eliminating data entry costs and errors, and help it to bring down your overall costs. It's important to consider when you look at moving forward with this, not just point solutions for an expense reporting or bill processing. It's important that you look at this in an integrated fashion of how do I bring in an application that's going to allow me to solve each one of my most important business problem, whether that's HR or AP, and then be able to grow on that later so that I don't have 20 different solutions and 20 different vendors. So that's what we are providing here in partnership with IBM, is the implement of this core infrastructure of enterprise content management to be able to solve specific business problems around finance and HR for this target market. So I'd like to invite you to go online at our website at www.moriahsystems.com and you can download our new ebook that's out. It's a guide for fast-growing retailers. And if you go to one of the solution pages in there, you'll see a link for it on your right or your left where you can register and download this ebook. But it's a very good read. We're very proud of it, and it will give you a lot of information in terms of what feedback that we've gotten from other people in your industries, and perhaps be able to give you more things to think about.